without further ado, I will introduce Judy, who I've come to know through Zoom, seen her in person out of those little squares. It's very nice. And she will share her story and do a little Q&A afterwards in case anybody has questions. Sure. Thank you so much, and thank you for giving up your time.
I'm very happy to be here. Some of you who are my friends may have heard some of these stories before, but you'll just have to sit and hear them again. So one of my earliest memories is being in the kitchen of my apartment at 21 Bennett Avenue. I'm like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years old. And I'm done with dinner. I go into the living room where my father's has the black and white TV on, with the antenna sticking up. And the image on the TV is of hundreds and hundreds of naked, emaciated bodies. And I'm like 4 and 5 years old. And I don't really remember what I did at the time, but standing here before you, I can see that. I'm there. And that doesn't leave you. And in a way, it's not a bad thing, because it created the human being that I am, the good and the bad. So my parents were not interned in concentration camp. They left Vienna in 1939 and went to England. But without a doubt, they were victims of this trauma. So my mother, she told a story about how her and her sister were able to get out of Vienna because in England, some of the people there were hiring maids. And that's how a lot of young Jewish women got out of Israel and in Germany. So she would tell the story about how she and her sister at the train station saying goodbye to their parents, knowing that they probably would never see them again. And these are the kinds of stories that I grew up with. She had to leave everything that she knew. Until the day she died, she had anxiety every time there was a change. Thank you. Of course. I remember we had this long hallway in Washington Heights, and we used to stencil the walls then. And when they repainted it and re-stenciled it, she had so much anxiety. And I remember, trying to be there and supporting her. And so we had that kind of dual role. She was very loving and supportive, and sometimes I was. So the other story that she liked to tell, and this story made her happy, was before she left Vienna, there was a knock on the door at her family home. She went to open the door, and there were, whoever the Viennese Gestapo were, and they were looking for her brother, my Uncle Natan. And she could say to them, "Sorry, he's not here. He left the country." And she really liked telling this story. So in the early 30s, my uncle emigrated to Israel and was a chalutz, a pioneer, and worked on a moshav, which is similar to a kibbutz, but you could have private property. And he lived there and fought for his country and raised a family. So she was really very happy about that. And how lucky she was that they then didn't take her and whoever was in the house. So my mother was pure love. If she had been born in this country, I think she would have become a therapist, because I could see her sitting on the phone, with the long phone cord right by the dumbwaiter that we had in the kitchen, and talking to her friends and listening to her friends and being there for my brother who was having trouble in school. And I miss her and love her so much. And she was a wonderful cook. She could make stews and kugel and bake pies and chalutkas, stuffed cabbage, and she was just, really, really good at that. And my dad's family was pretty well off. They were in Vienna. They had come from Poland, as had my mother's parents. My grandpa Marcus had left Poland when they wanted to draft him in World War I and went to Vienna. He was an opera singer in Poland. Could not get a job as an opera singer, so he was very resourceful and somehow made a living until he became a cantor at the big conservative synagogue in Vienna. My father was a tailor, and he had his own store in Vienna until 1938, when he went out of business because people didn't go into stores very much where there was a big sign on the window that said Jude, Jew. So he kind of saw the writing on the wall. And he and my mom had been dating, but they weren't married. And he applied for a visa to the United States and was given an affidavit, but he would have to wait probably a couple of years until his number came up. And my grandpa and grandma on my father's side, they also applied, but they would have had to wait much, much, much longer. So some American Jews started a transit camp in England where you could go and wait until your number came up. So my father did that, but before he did that, he tried to escape Austria 5 or 6 times. Each time he got caught. He would go to Holland or Belgium, but he would get caught, sent back. One time he was in jail for 6 weeks, being threatened to be sent to Dachau. But luckily that didn't happen. And the way he told his story was he was lucky because the police that caught him were German and not Austrian, because the Austrians were supposedly that much worse. He really believed that he would have been sent to concentration camp if the Austrians had caught them. My grandfather, he did not want to go to the transfer camp and wanted to wait to come to this country. But in, I believe it was 1942, he and my maternal grandma, Charlotte, was sent to Theresienstadt. So Theresienstadt was the model concentration camp that the Red Cross was taken to, and a lot of artists were there. So he was there, and the story goes on Yom Kippur 1944. He, as the cantor, he was holding services for some of the inmates, and they were interrupted by the guards. They came in and said, "Tomorrow you go to Auschwitz," and they knew what that meant. And my grandpa Marcus, and I believe an act of defiance, continued the services. And I'm very proud of him. And the next day, he went to Auschwitz and he was killed. And this was October 44, and Auschwitz was liberated by the Russians or the Soviet Union January 45. So 3 months. That was, My maternal grandparents, who I know a little bit less about, they were taken to Minsk and killed in a camp there. So I grew up in Washington Heights. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Washington Heights. I know some of you are.
El Barrio.
El Barrio now. Achshab
Wasn't that?
Barrio. But you know, like neighborhoods for immigrants change, but they stay neighborhoods for immigrants. And one of the things I've learned is that as an immigrant or the child of an immigrant, I have so much more in common with other immigrants and children of immigrants than with anybody else. Okay, so when I was in kindergarten, went to PS 183, I came to class one day after parent-teacher, evening, and the teacher said something in front of the class about how my mother's accent was, disturbing for her. And my mother never went to another parent-teacher conference. And I remember for years, I was working with the Anti-Defamation League for their World of Difference program. And I would go into doing, my programs with teachers. And some of the teachers would say, I don't understand. We don't get parents of the immigrant children. Do they not care? Or, and, my brain went right away to kindergarten. And it was, if you take the time to understand and make people feel welcome and worthwhile and not the other, then you would have the parents of these children coming, and that's something that you can do and that you should do. The other thing that my father always said, don't rock the boat. Of course, I never listened to anything, but, and when Ed Koch was elected mayor of New York, he was so upset. He was so worried. Anytime a Jew would run for office, he was just, I wish they didn't run, and I hope they don't win. And this is a fear that I've heard from other immigrant groups. Don't tell everybody who you are. They don't need to know. And there's that fear that we share, and we don't talk about it enough to know that, so that we can support each other and be there for each other. So that's part of the lessons. So when I graduated high school, I went to Israel, and I felt like I had come home, and I was so happy that we had a safe place to be, or so I thought. And then after that summer, I came back. I went to CUNY City College, and we started and I joined the Jewish Student Union right away, and we started the Jewish Studies Department. And that was a time when, the Black Studies Department got started also, and Elie Wiesel came, who was one of our first teachers, and so my identity as a Jew up until that point was so connected to the Holocaust. And at one point I said, no more. I do not want my identity as a Jew to be as a victim. And I see that even today, there are a lot of people who almost wear that victimhood as an honor, but not for me. I said, I will not be a victim. My identity as a Jew is the culture, the food, the love and the compassion. I mean, that's what being a Jew means to me. And it's got nothing to do with religion. It just has to do with how I was brought up and what I read and what I understand. It's about being a human being. That's what it means to me. So then I spent my third year of college in Jerusalem at school. Although I hardly ever remember going to school. I remember going to Ulpan and learning Hebrew, but I don't remember going to school. And Jerusalem was this amazing city. I don't know how many of you have been there, but you go to the old city and you hear the Jews praying at the wall, the Muslims praying at the mosque, and the call to prayer to the mosque, and you hear the church bells. I mean, is there another place on earth where all of this is happening in this magnificent old city? I don't know. I mean, it would be wonderful if we could learn that we could live together and have that space and enjoy that and recognize the humanity in all of us. Well, a story that I would like to tell, because it's really a wonderful man that I met. His name was Werner Reich. I don't know if any of you remember him. He didn't live here, but he came up and did some anti-bullying programs in Monticello and Jeffersonville. And I met him because he was the uncle of a good friend of mine. And he was one of Mengele's boys in Auschwitz. He was on the death march. When he was in Auschwitz, one of his bunkmates, because I think they had like 6 people in a bunk, was a very famous magician in Auschwitz. In Austria. And he taught Werner card magic tricks. And one of the first times I remember Matt and I met him, we went to the Villa Roma for lunch or something, and he showed us a card trick that he learned. And he decided later in life to put on an anti-bullying program and help students understand what happened. And basically what happened was nobody said anything. I mean, there were some really good people, but the countries let all this happen. And when I taught the Holocaust curriculum, Echoes and Reflections for the Anti-Defamation League, I don't think we ever talked about Hitler, because it wasn't about Hitler. It was about all the other people that let it happen. And that kind of was Werner's message. But what was so amazing about him was he survived this horrific experience. And he and his wife lived together for many, many, many years. And then she died. He was in his late 80s, I think, or 90. And he went to England and hooked up with this woman that they both had known from Europe. And he and this woman would, they were together, and like he's in his 90s. And okay, he got out of this horrible, traumatic experience. And what did he learn? He learned to live. I mean, that's huge. There's so many lessons for us other than, depression and feeling sorry for ourselves. And, so when I meet somebody, one of the very first things they know about me is that I'm the child of Holocaust survivors. Hello, my name is Judy. I'm the child of Holocaust. You want to know who I am? This is who I am. And basically what it means to me is that we have a responsibility to every other human being only because we breathe the same air. It's not about all of this stuff that divides us. It's about all of the stuff that brings us together. And that's really one of the big lessons. And the one of the other things, I mean, there are many, many, is resilience. How do life brings us suffering. That's a part of life, and pain and loss and, and joy, and love, and it brings us all of that, and that's so important to remember, and it's so important to help us get through those times of pain and loss and suffering, because we all go through it at some point to some extent. So that's one of the other things. And from Werner, that life is very precious and live every single day. So that's kind of a big part of that. And, one of the big lessons, especially at this present time when we are so divided, is to know that we're all human beings and that we need to take care of each other, that's our responsibility. So I just want to close with Martin Niemöller's quote that you probably all know. First they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. And the other thing I want to make sure I say is that there were 6 million Jews that died in the Holocaust. And there were millions and millions of other people that died in the Holocaust, whether they were communists or disabled or Romas, That's something that's important to remember. So thank you for being able to share my story.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? I just want to say thank you so much. And also to Judy, so I didn't know until last summer that I had any relatives, connections of families of the Holocaust. And we wound up going to Terezin. And it was my aunt's grandmother who was there and some other cousins. And I'm 62 and spent until last summer not knowing that anyone in our family, they never talked about it, didn't know about it. They came to know about it through an ancestry, somebody who contacted somebody who contacted somebody. And it never dawned on me until you just spoke, Judy, and that she was cremated in October. And never until you just spoke did it even dawn on me to say, I wonder if that date had any connection to the high holidays. So I appreciate that. I will look that up. It just, I've curated this and heard so many stories, and I sit and hear and I was like, oh my gosh, that's another thing to learn. And we're all people and have this shared, experience. The one thing that I did take when I was there is, I don't know if you've ever been there, if anyone else has been to Terezin, but it's as if time stood still there. It's nothing, it's not dirty, but it's not clean. It's as if they just took out of the barracks the cots and things like that, but they don't really have a recreation. So unlike, say, for example, Williamsburg, where it's recreated to be a colonial, it's very much as if time stood still there. And people who had their homes there before it was taken over, because it was already an army and a town, and it was a barracks, wanted to move back after the end of the war. They wanted to reclaim their family's property. And so some people have moved back. And there's the town square, there's the church, there's the buildings. I know personally I could not move back there knowing what had taken place, because you can see it every day. But it is a somewhat functioning town, again, primarily populated, we learned, by people who, before the war, that's where their family lived. So they took it back. But one of the things that I did take, and we were able to go to, they showed us on a map where it would be my aunt's grandmother, so where she was housed and where the hospital was and the crematoria was. I have to say, I could not bring myself to go to the crematoria. It is on the map, you can go, and I was like, no, absolutely not. But we were able to see the hospital. And afterwards, I'm standing with my family, we each had our few moments, and then I'm looking around and I'm like, I have to take something. And I literally bent down and took some stones because I just felt like I'm not buying something in a gift shop. I wasn't gonna do that. And so I took some stones, and then fast forward, coming home through TSA, I had put them in my backpack. Didn't even like I knew I had them. And the gentleman's like going through and said, do you know you have stones like in your backpack? Do you want to empty it? I was like, yes, I do. Is there a problem? And he's like, no, but like it's adding weight. Is it overweight? No. So just please leave them alone. Because I wasn't going through the whole thing.
But the metaphor of adding weight.
It was, yeah.
I don't know, really struck on that.
And I'm like, because I actually think like, what would I have done if he wanted to take them? Like that was probably, I did bring back other soup, but that was like a heartfelt souvenir. And it was interesting because the rest of the family had gone through and they're looking at me and you're like through TSA, like, and they're like, Mom, like what's the hold up here? And so I do have them in a display over there. If anyone wants, feels the connection, I can open up the box. But I said to my cousins, I brought these back for you. After we're done, I will, meet you and give them, to you. But it was just so tangible. It made it, so tangible. So I will look it up and, and now I feel like we just have a different connection that I would not have known if you had not shared this story. So I appreciate, everyone's here. I don't know if anyone has questions for Judy, or, a different side of Judy. And, continue sharing this exhibit and our learning with each other. And thank you again, Judy.